You know, Caleb's nothing like me. Everyone thinks he's perfect, Noah said, his voice tinged with both pride and annoyance. But trust me, he's got his flaws. That was the first thing Noah ever said about his brother, Caleb. It lingered in my mind as I stood in the doorway, watching Caleb step into my world for the first time. Tall, confident, and effortlessly charming, he was the kind of person you couldn't help but notice. And I noticed. Immediately. Noah had been my best friend since high school, a bond so close it felt more like family than friendship. We shared everything, bad jokes, secrets, even the occasional fight. His house was my second home, a sanctuary from the chaos of my own. I knew his family well, or at least I thought I did. Caleb had been a name, a face in the occasional photo on the mantel, but nothing more. Until now. Caleb smiled as he dropped his duffel bag in the corner of the living room, his dark eyes scanning the space with casual ease. So, this is where Noah disappears to half the time, he said, his tone warm but teasing. Nice place. I tried to match his energy, shrugging off the sudden tightness in my chest. Yeah, well, someone's got to keep him out of trouble. Caleb chuckled, a low, rich sound that felt too intimate for a first meeting. Good luck with that. The plan was simple. Caleb was crashing at Noah's for a couple of nights while he was in town. Noah had insisted it wouldn't be a big deal, just an extra body on the couch. But from the moment Caleb walked in, the air felt different. Sure. As the evening unfolded, I found myself stealing glances when I thought no one would notice. Caleb had this way of commanding attention without trying. A quiet confidence that seemed to fill every corner of the room. He was nothing like Noah, who thrived on chaos and humor. Caleb was steady, observant, with a sharp wit that surfaced when you least expected it. At dinner, I caught myself laughing too hard at one of his stories, the kind of laugh that felt unfamiliar coming from me. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it, as if he were letting you in on a secret. I noticed the way he gestured with his hands, the faint scar on his knuckle, the way his smile tilted slightly to one side. And then there was Noah, completely oblivious. To him, this was just another night, another story to add to our years of friendship. He had no idea what was stirring inside me, the way my thoughts were drifting to places they shouldn't. As the night wore on, the three of us settled in the living room, a movie playing in the background. Noah stretched out on the floor, half asleep, while Caleb and I ended up on opposite ends of the couch. The distance between us felt both comforting and unbearable. So, what's your story? Caleb asked suddenly, his voice low enough that it wouldn't wake Noah. Caught off guard, I hesitated. What do you mean? He shrugged, his gaze steady. You've been Noah's best friend for years, but he never shuts up about you. I figure there's got to be more to you than what he lets on. It was a simple question, but it landed like a challenge. What was my story? How could I sum up years of loyalty, heartbreak, and quiet yearning in a way that didn't reveal too much? I'm not that interesting, I said, deflecting with a smile. Caleb leaned back, studying me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. I don't believe that. The conversation shifted after that, but the weight of his words stayed with me. There was something about Caleb, something I couldn't quite place but felt in every interaction. A quiet magnetism that pulled me closer, even when I knew I should keep my distance. By the time the night ended, Noah was snoring softly, and Caleb had disappeared into the guest room. I sat alone in the living room, the faint hum of the television filling the silence. My thoughts were a mess, tangled in ways I couldn't untangle. I knew I shouldn't feel what I was feeling. Caleb was Noah's brother, part of a world I'd promised myself I wouldn't complicate. But promises are fragile things, easily broken by the simplest of moments. A glance, a smile, a conversation that lingers too long. As I turned off the TV and headed to my room, I couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted, that this was the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. Or maybe something I'd been waiting for all along. The faint glow of the television cast soft shadows across the living room as Noah dozed off, sprawled on the floor beneath a blanket. Caleb and I sat on opposite ends of the couch, separated by a small sea of cushions. The late-night quiet made everything feel heavier, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the house, the sound of Caleb shifting slightly closer. "You don't seem like the kind of person who lets people in easily," Caleb said suddenly, his voice low, almost thoughtful. His words caught me off guard, and I looked up, meeting his steady gaze. The sharpness of his observation felt like an arrow aimed straight at the walls I kept carefully constructed. "What makes you say that?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me with its slight tremor. Caleb tilted his head, studying me in a way that felt entirely too intimate. "It's just a feeling. You watch people more than you talk to them. Like you're always analyzing, but never letting anyone get too close." A nervous laugh escaped me. "And you figured all that out in one evening?" "I'm good at reading people," he said simply, his lips curving into a smile that felt both warm and dangerous. I looked away, hoping the dim light would hide the heat rising to my cheeks. Caleb had a way of cutting through defenses with such ease, and it terrified me how much of myself I felt exposed to him in that moment. The conversation shifted after that, meandering into safer territory, but the undercurrent of tension remained. We talked about our favorite movies, his work, my plans for the future, each exchange laced with unspoken meanings, as if every word had a double edge. At one point, I got up to refill my glass in the kitchen. The coolness of the tile floor grounded me, a small escape from the charged atmosphere in the living room. I was pouring water when I heard his footsteps behind me. "You don't have to be nervous around me, you know," Caleb said softly, his voice closer than I'd expected. I turned to find him leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, his dark eyes fixed on me. "I'm not nervous," I lied, though the quiver in my hand betrayed me as I set the glass on the counter. He stepped into the kitchen, closing the distance between us in a way that made my pulse quicken. "You sure about that?" His words hung in the air, and for a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us. The weight of his gaze was almost unbearable, and yet, I couldn't bring myself to look away. "This feels like a bad idea," I whispered, more to myself than to him. "Maybe," he said, his voice steady but soft. "But that doesn't mean you don't want it." The honesty of his words struck me like a lightning bolt. He wasn't playing games, wasn't tiptoeing around the line we both knew we were about to cross. My breath hitched as he stepped even closer, his hand brushing mine where it rested on the counter. "Caleb," I started, his name barely audible as guilt tangled with the undeniable pull I felt toward him. "I won't do anything you don't want," he said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper. "But don't lie to yourself about what this is." For a moment, time seemed to stop. The hum of the refrigerator faded, the distant creaks of the house disappeared, and all that remained was him. His hand resting lightly on mine, his eyes holding mine captive. I knew I should step back, put space between us, remind myself of Noah sleeping just down the hall. But I didn't. Instead, I leaned into the moment, letting it pull me under like a riptide. Caleb's lips brushed mine, tentative at first, testing the waters. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I hesitated for the briefest of seconds before giving in completely. The kiss deepened, a whirlwind of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle: desire, guilt, fear, and something dangerously close to exhilaration. When we finally pulled apart, the weight of what we'd just done came crashing down. His hand lingered on mine, but the warmth in his eyes had been replaced by something heavier, more complicated. "I should go to bed," I murmured, my voice barely audible. Caleb nodded, stepping back and giving me space I didn't know I needed. "Good night," he said, his tone soft but unreadable. As I walked to my room, my mind raced with questions I didn't have the answers to. What had I just done? What would Noah think if he knew? And why, despite the guilt clawing at my chest, did a part of me wish I could go back to that moment and stay there just a little longer? The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the living room. I had barely slept, the weight of the previous night pressing down on me like an anchor. Noah was already awake, rummaging through the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "Coffee?" he called out cheerfully, his tone so normal it was almost unbearable. "Yeah, thanks," I replied, my voice strained. I glanced toward the hallway, half expecting Caleb to emerge. Part of me dreaded facing him. The other part craved the clarity, or closure, his presence might bring. But the kitchen filled only with the sounds of Noah humming off-key and the soft clatter of mugs. "You okay?" Noah asked, finally noticing my silence as he slid a mug of coffee across the counter. "Yeah, just didn't sleep well," I lied, avoiding his gaze. Noah shrugged, already shifting gears. "Well, Caleb took off early. Said he had some work to catch up on. Classic Caleb, always busy." He laughed, completely unaware of the knot forming in my stomach. Caleb was gone. The realization hit me like a cold slap. No explanation, no chance to talk about what had happened, no way to untangle the mess he'd left behind. I forced a smile. "That sounds about right." Noah didn't seem to notice my unease as he launched into a story about a mutual friend. I nodded and made the right sounds at the right moments, but my thoughts were miles away, replaying the night in a relentless loop. By the time I left Noah's house that afternoon, the silence of my own apartment felt suffocating. Every object seemed to accuse me: the photo of Noah and me from years ago, the text thread on my phone with his goofy memes, the lingering scent of Caleb's cologne that I couldn't seem to escape. I sat on the edge of my bed, my head in my hands, trying to sort through the chaos. What had I done? I'd crossed a line that couldn't be undone, betrayed the trust of the one person who'd always been in my corner. And yet, the memory of Caleb lingered, not just the kiss, but the way he'd looked at me, the quiet intensity of his presence. It wasn't just about attraction, it was something deeper, something that felt like both a spark and a wound. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of my spiral. It was a message from Caleb. "Can we talk?" My heart jumped, conflicting emotions crashing over me. Relief, anger, hope, it all tangled together as I stared at the screen. I hesitated for a moment before typing a short response. When his reply came quickly: "Tonight. Your place." I spent the rest of the day in a haze, alternating between pacing the room and sitting frozen on the couch. When the knock on the door finally came, my stomach churned. Caleb stood there, his usual confidence muted, his hands shoved into his jacket pockets. "Hey," he said softly. I stepped aside, letting him in. The tension between us was palpable, the silence stretching as we moved to the living room. "I didn't mean to just leave this morning," Caleb started, his voice low. "I thought maybe some space would help, but I couldn't stop thinking about you." "About last night?" I swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. "It shouldn't have happened," I said finally, my voice cracking. "Noah?" "I know," Caleb interrupted. "Trust me, I know. But that doesn't change how I feel." I looked at him, searching for answers in his expression. "How do you feel, Caleb?" "Because I'm drowning here." He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "I feel like I've spent too much of my life ignoring what I want. And last night, it felt real. But I also know it wasn't fair to you or to Noah." The honesty in his words was both comforting and crushing. "So what now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Caleb sighed, sinking into the couch. "I don't know. But I do know I don't want to hurt you, or him. Maybe this was a mistake, but it wasn't meaningless." The room fell into silence, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. I stood, pacing the room. "I can't do this, Caleb. I can't look Noah in the eye and pretend nothing happened. And I can't be the reason you two fall apart." Caleb rose, his expression pained. "I get it. I do. And if you need me to stay away, I will. But don't think for a second that I regret meeting you." His words hit me like a blow, and I turned away, tears pricking at my eyes. "Maybe it's better if we don't see each other again." He nodded, his jaw tight. "If that's what you want." Without another word, he walked to the door, pausing only for a moment before stepping out. I sank onto the couch, the silence swallowing me whole. The line had been crossed, the damage done. But as I sat there, staring at the empty space Caleb had left behind, I couldn't help but wonder if some lines, once crossed, weren't meant to be redrawn.